when Hamas launched war against Israel. So the first questions are, why did the AJC do this survey? And then what makes this survey unique? And what are the top findings?
Well, first, thank you, everyone, for spending time on your Tuesday to join us for lunch to talk about a topic that I feel like has just been on our minds for years now. This is not the first anti-Semitism presentation I'm sure anyone has been to. In fact, it seems to be more and more and more. So we will talk a little bit about what's actually working, what we're doing, where we're actually seeing levels decrease as well. So I do want to empower everyone to leave feeling a little bit better. But AJC has been doing this State of Anti-Semitism in America report since 2019. We started it, honestly, 1 year after the Tree of Life synagogue shooting in Pittsburgh because we wanted to assess how were American Jews feeling just based on that incident, which was the deadliest attack in our history at the time. Little did we know, by doing it each year, and that wasn't a guarantee, by the way. When I started this process in 2020 in my role as AJC's U.S. Director for Combating Anti-Semitism, every year something happened, whether it would have been what happened in Pittsburgh or Poway or Jersey City or Kanye West or the October 7th terrorist attacks. Every year there was something that made us say we have to do this again and again. And how is the Jewish community changing? How is it seeing anti-Semitism differently? How is it experiencing it differently? And now we're doing it every year, but unbeknownst to us at the time, we've now tracked 6 years worth of data on the Jewish community, and we don't do this ourselves, by the way. I know there's a lot of polls that come out every other day. This is done by a company called SSRS. It's a public opinion research firm. We make sure that we have the most objective, representative sample. It's methodologically sound. We're finding things that we wouldn't have had 6-7 years ago tracking the current rise of anti-Semitism. So we have this data set, and we also look at the general population. I think that's actually probably one of the most unique pieces about this report is that it parallels, there's 2 surveys, that's what makes up this report. It's a survey of the American Jewish population and a survey of the general U.S. population. And we can compare the two, and we ask them similar questions, and we can see these changes over time. So that's why we do this survey. Really the thing that's unique about what I'm about to share with you now, some of our findings, is this is the first report that's been published in the United States that looks at the state of anti-Semitism in America from both a Jewish perspective and a general population perspective since October 7th, 1 year since. So this is, we were in the field again in October and November of 2024 and asked specific questions that said, since October 7th in the last year, have you this? Has this happened? Has this happened? And so this is the first publication that's come out. There'll be more, but this is the first one that we actually have data on. So that's really what makes this one unique. And I wanted to actually start by just sharing a couple quick top findings, and I think I'm going to be actually better placed to do that from behind the podium. So this will be a little bit of a moving section. So you asked about the top findings, and thank you, yeah. I could do it. I could use the slider, but I think this will just be a little bit easier. And that's just the impact of October 7th on the Jewish community. And I'm going to share a couple of statistics. In fact, there's a few statistics that we'll be sharing today that there's a few statistics that we'll be sharing today, but every person is behind a statistic. And so when I'm sharing a statistic, I want you to also ask yourself, has any of this, how do you feel about this question? So we found that 77% of American Jews report feeling less safe as a Jewish person in the United States. Over 3/4 feel less safe as a Jewish person in the United States because of the Hamas terrorist attacks. Let me ask you, do you feel less safe in the United? And I think there was a real disconnect in the American population who don't fully understand how something that could happen abroad, the impact it could have on Americans at home. And this is a number that we're that we found. 90% say that anti-Semitism has increased in the last 1 year. 60% say a lot. 60% say a lot, 90% say it's increased. 70% of American Jews say the institutions that they've been affiliated with have increased security measures since October 7th. And this was already in addition to many years of security increases, but just since October 7th, there's been an additional, this is a 70% increase. And so this is really some of the impact that we're seeing. And then the last slide I want to show on the top lines is 73% of American Jews say that Jews in the United States are less secure than they were 1 year ago. But I mentioned that we've been doing the survey now for several years, and I think this is actually what makes this data collection unique, is that we can look at trends. This number doesn't mean anything on its own, in isolation. It doesn't look good, but how do we know how bad it is unless we can compare it to years past? So this is really one of the first years we've been able to look at these years. And you can see in 2021, I'm sorry this is small, and I will share this presentation with anyone who came today, so you can all have access to the slides. But in 2021, you can see at the top that 31% of American Jews said that the status of Jews in the United States was less secure than a year ago. 41% in 2022 said less secure. 63% said so in 2023. And 73%, almost 3/4 of American Jews, said that Jews are less secure in the U.S. today than they were a year ago. And the number one reason given was the aftermath of October 7th in the Hamas-Israel war, followed by that anti-Semitism in America has just become more open and more violent. That was the second reason given. So I will pause there, but those are our top findings. I can also stay up here because I do have more. I have more slides.
Holly, your organization has been tracking this for several years, as you mentioned. Last year's survey was in the field and asking people, both American Jews and U.S. adults, about anti-Semitism right after October 7th. And this year's survey was in the field right after the 1-year anniversary of the terrorist attacks. A year later, what changes are we seeing? And can you unpack these trends with us?
Absolutely. So in addition to that impact of October 7th, and a little bit of that taste I just shared with you where you saw that trend change, we really are seeing that anti-Semitism in America has reached new levels. You feel this, you hear about this anecdotally, but what does that mean with data? And at the end of the day, we want data to drive our efforts and our advocacy, not just feelings. Like, they're important, but we really want to have those numbers. So we found this, so I'm going to share a few of the trends with you. So 91% of American Jews think that anti-Semitism in the United States has increased over the past 5 years. That's actually much higher than it was even 4 years ago. It was about 82% when we first started doing this study. But where you see this change, where you see these trends, is with American Jews who say that it's increased a lot. So 2021, 37% of American Jews said a lot. 60% are saying it's increased a lot today, and this is over the last 5 years. So this is a little bit different than that question about in the past 1 year, has it increased since October 7th? This is a question that we call a trend question. It means that we ask it every single year in order to see how things are changing. We don't actually change the wording of the question, so we preserve that trend. So you can see this change here as well. One of the biggest findings was the change in behavior. And we found that 56% of American Jews changed their behavior in at least one of these ways that we asked about out of fear of anti-Semitism in the last year. Whether they didn't wear something that would identify them as Jewish, they didn't go somewhere that might be affiliated with a Jewish institution, or out of their fear or concern for their safety as someone who's Jewish, they didn't post something online. And what I want you, I know it's small, I can read through it, but the big blue numbers here, you can compare it to maybe, take a look at the red, which is 2022, it's only 2 years ago, and we're seeing world jumps. So 2 years ago, 38% of American Jews said they had changed their behavior at least in one of these ways. That jump number is 56% right now. And I want to actually, I had a slide, but I'm going to read you what the slide had said. I lost the slide in transit here to the synagogue. But 62% of Jewish women report changing their behavior at least once due to fear of anti-Semitism, compared to 51% of Jewish men. Okay, so you see that this average is 56, but I think it's really important to know that Jewish women are actually changing their behavior at a statistically significant percentage increase more than Jewish men. Jewish women are more likely than Jewish men to have avoided publicly wearing, carrying, or displaying things that would identify them as Jewish. In the last year, 47% of Jewish women said that they had avoided wearing something, compared to 33% of Jewish men. Jewish women are also more likely to avoid events or situations out of their concern or safety of someone who's Jewish, compared to Jewish men, 36% versus 28%. And they've also been more likely to not post content online, 42% versus 32%. So there is a gender difference here. I think it's actually really worth noting when we think about even solutions, like understanding the experiences of Jewish women compared to Jewish men. And we'll get to this in a minute, but understanding the differences and experiences of younger Jews compared to their older counterparts. So I'm going to just do a couple more slides here on the trends. We found that 1 in 3 American Jews report being the personal target of anti-Semitism in the past 12 months. 1 in 3. This is quite a high number. It's not as high as what we see in Europe. When we ask the European Jewish communities, it's up to 90. It's upwards of over 9 in 10 have said that they've experienced anti-Semitism. But still, 1 in 3 have reported that they've experienced anti-Semitism. Again, the text is quite small, but what this means is that they've either, very small numbers have been physically attacked, which is good, but anti-Semitic remark in person, vandalism to their property, victim of an anti-Semitic remark or post online, or they were victim of another kind of anti-Semitism not asked about, which is important. We need to capture what we're not asking about. And we had 10%, 1 in 10 Jews say that, of the 1 in 10 of that group say that this is where they had experienced it. What I think is important to note, though, and don't worry about reading this, I will explain, is that our young Jewish population is actually experiencing anti-Semitism differently. I don't know any other way to say that, but we see it in the data that they are, 41% have experienced anti-Semitism compared to 31% over the age of 30. So that 33% is an aggregate, is looking at that together. They're much more likely to be the target of an anti-Semitic remark in person. 30% versus 21% of those over the age of 30. They're also much more likely to report being targeted online. You see 21% versus 16%, or another instance not already asked about, 16% versus 9%. So this is something that we're really tracking, and we really want to understand what young Jews are experiencing. I won't go to, maybe the questions have answered, you can ask some more specific questions about college campuses, but we did also find that 1 in 3 American Jewish students say that they've experienced anti-Semitism during their time as a college student. That's quite a high number. We actually partnered with Hillel International in order to have a bigger student sample size of those experiences. All right, I'm going to just skip ahead to one really important thing to note on the question on trends. And this is good news. U.S. adults, so just the general population here in America, we're seeing change in awareness over the last 4 or 5 years. And I've personally seen it because I've been working on this study since 2020, doing it every year since. And we're seeing more U.S. adults know what anti-Semitism is, in 4 or 5 years. More U.S. adults saying that it's a problem, saying that it's increased. Even this year we had a finding that we found that those who said it's increased, 88% of Americans were concerned about it. So this is something that wasn't 4 years ago. The gaps between how Jews were feeling and what Americans knew was very big. It's still there, but we're actually watching in time that gap shrink, where more and more Americans are saying, yes, I know we see it, yes, it's a problem. What's interesting, and I'll just put a pin in this, but we can go there. What's interesting is when you disaggregate the American population, you do have differences in how Hispanic Americans or Black Americans or Muslim Americans are seeing or understanding the problem. But overall, we're seeing that gap decrease, which I think is welcomed. Doesn't mean that the problem is still very much there, but I did want to point that out. And I won't spend too much time, but you can just, if you look at 2021 and you compare it to now, you can see these increases. We're going from 60% saying it's a problem, now it's over 7-10. 44% of Americans said that anti-Semitism had increased in the past 5 years in 2021. 60%, 59% are saying it now. In fact, you can see how the increase of those who are saying it's a lot. So this is the general population. This is Americans being polled, and I think it's really important because we might see things in the news, we might make us feel really bad, make us feel like we're alone, people don't know what's going on. And then with real data, with statistically significant and sound data, you actually are seeing something a little bit different. And I think that's really important. This is the concern piece. So I'm going to pause here. I'm going to pause on the statistic, Rabbi Barras, because I think this is a good finding that Americans are concerned about the problem, and we can go to the next question.
All right, maybe I'm trying to think, since maybe Charlottesville or Pittsburgh, the first time I've ever heard anyone in a talk about anti-Semitism say, some good news. It's a long time. And maybe you can comment this. I don't know, this is a little bit off script. You're going to think I'm crazy. But over the past couple of years, we've seen some different types of campaigns around the country during the Super Bowl. Bob Kraft with the blue pens, people like Van Jones, different types of campaigns against anti-Semitism. Maybe some people are familiar with the pink Jew belong signs that are all over the country. There are even a couple on US 1 now. I saw one the other day just coming back from the Grove. I'm curious, every time I see those, I'm wondering, are they helping? Are they hurting? Or do people not even care? And now that you showed this statistic, I'm wondering, do they actually help? Because every time I see them, I'm like almost get a little nervous, like don't call attention to the problem, it's just going to make it worse. Maybe it's actually working. Do you know anything about that? I know it's not on our script, but maybe you could say a word about it, just based on the statistic that you just showed us.
So this statistic was just in reference to Americans who believed that anti-Semitism was increasing, right? So all of that group, the 60% or so, were asked that. So this is the 88% of that group, but it's still over 1,000 Americans of our 2,000 sample size, which is representative. This is very important. As we've seen anti-Semitism increase, you've seen all these different campaigns, these signs, these advertisements. A direction that the research is going, and I should be very clear when I say the research field of anti-Semitism, it's actually quite small. Jewish institutions are doing it, but only recently in the last year are we actually seeing universities have centers now. Like, it's a very small field. In fact, there's probably less than 100 scholars in the world who are studying anti-Semitism right now. So that's one really important thing to know. And the latest data I heard was that our field is about 7 years behind where we need to be to really understand the problem compared to LGBTQ community, compared to other communities that have been we're behind as far as what's happening. We will continue to be tracking the problem, tracking experiences, tracking perceptions, tracking incidents, tracking anti-Semitic attitudes, something that ADL does, and there's another ADL event tonight that's really important in the field of understanding. Where the research is going though now is determining what's working and what's not working. And ADL's actually been doing a lot of research in this space, the Center on Anti-Semitism Research, and I can at least speak to some things that they're finding. they're finding that the messaging that we've been doing over the past few years, some of it has not been effective. In fact, some of it's actually been counterproductive. And it depends on audiences. So if you look at American society and you think, those are people that will never reach, these are people that are on the fence, these are people that feel this way about this way, and so you almost have to do different messaging for different groups. So to your question about jubilee, like some of those messages are very like, oh, they're uncomfortable, they're looking uncomfortable, but that might reach a group, and an advertisement on Super Bowl might reach a different group. And so I do think a little bit of this mixed messaging is okay, as long as we begin to test it with the population. So one example, there was 2 advertisements that the Super Bowl, I think, crafted a couple years ago. One message, I think, one of them didn't do as well. Like, it brought up competitive victimhood of suffering. It made it feel like, oh, well, Jews suffering, but no one mentioned me. They seem to be doing well. It actually reinforced some stereotypes inadvertently. It went to fight anti-Semitism, and when we message tested it on about 28,000 people, they found that it actually had a backlash. We need to know that before we put something out into the open. So that's something that we're learning. However, the one that did very well, I don't know if you remember the advertisement, it was, or the ad, there was a swastika painted, Nazi swastika painted on a garage door of a Jewish woman, a family, and she had a daughter. And the neighbor came and painted over it, non-Jewish neighbor. That one changed hearts and minds like they've never seen. They identified with the Jewish family suffering, they identified with the non-Jewish neighbor, the ally, and they actually have done some more research finding that while Jewish story and Jewish narrative are really important to countering anti-Semitism, actually individual story is much more important than any statistic I'll ever share. It's non-Jews telling the stories about their Jewish friends or their Jewish neighbors that actually even takes it a step further, and that's one of the reasons why that advertisement was so effective. So to your point, we're still learning right now, but testing what's actually working and what's not, if that's helpful. Yeah.
You know, just anecdotally, after October 7th, as someone who wears a yarmulke, I will ask you, since October 7th, how many comments, negative, do you think I've gotten? Not just in Miami, but anywhere that I've flown or, visited, how many negative comments have I gotten wearing the yarmulke out and about? 0. I get a lot of shaloms. Every once in a while, not often enough, but every once in a while, someone will pay for my meal. I'll get up to go, and they said someone paid for your meal. It's usually an evangelical. Trying to encourage that. I think it's fine. I think it's like a nice interfaith thing. But I will tell you that not long after October 7th, I was at Lakeside doing the funeral in Doral. And I needed gas, so I pulled into this station. And I felt, Doral, I don't spend much time there. There's no Jews over there. I don't know who's going to be in the gas station. And I was really nervous to go into the gas station wearing my yarmulke. No one else there cared. Everyone was just as friendly, just as fine. But I remember being really, really nervous about it. I also remember, not long after October 7th, I visited my parents in New York City. And it was Hanukkah time. It was like right after. And there were some Chabad guys handing out, like menorahs and candles in Times Square. And I was scared for them. I was like, you guys, aren't you nervous to be out here? Not at all. Yeah. Not at all, they weren't. I was amazed. Now, just one more point. Several years ago, I was on the March of the Living with the Federation Mega Mission, and there was an Orthodox rabbi from Miami, he was a friend of mine, and he was wearing a hat. And I said, you wear a hat? He said, I don't wear a yarmulke. I don't wear a yarmulke underneath his hat, but I don't show a yarmulke in Europe. You say, who needs it? We don't need to. And I also have that feeling. When I'm in Europe, unless I have, Sharon right next to me, Who needs it? What do I need it for? But just as, this is anecdotal. You could probably ask lots of other people who wear kippah to tell you it's been a nightmare. Because I live in Miami, which is like a bubble. And I'm in this building 98% of my time. And there have been anti-Semites in this building. People don't like Rabbis, but they're not Jews. Some of this meant to be funny. But anecdotally, just as someone who wears a kippah, I haven't had one negative comment since October 7th. To me, it's interesting. Okay, let's get back to Holly. Someone actually knows what she's talking about here. All of these numbers, people resonate with our community, and capture our experiences over the past year. So, how does what you're saying, or even comparatively to our neck of the woods, compare to national or the global trends and concerns that you're seeing? I didn't have the examples of the case.
No, you're good. I was actually going to just comment that when they're testing what's working on anti-Semitism, they have a whole bunch of narratives that aren't working and which ones are not. They found that actually education around misinformation and disinformation can do more than education just on bias and bias training. People actually will lose some of the understandings of bias and much more quickly than they will skills on being able to ascertain what's misinformation or disinformation around anti-Semitism. But one third thing that they find that's working is humor. It's actually making people laugh, like having this kind of these fun moments, which you just like. So I do want to say that when we going to get you on the road or humor campaign, that's doing very well. And weirdly, actually, they can even do like different conservative groups. They actually know which groups and Americans that does better with. So we can find our audiences for you. One of the things that we're
By the way,
I've been with a lot of groups who don't seem to appreciate humor.
Now you tell them it's about anti-Semitism, and then they might be able to. So I've worked in the field of countering anti-Semitism or working to prevent it, even a little bit of monitoring for a little over 10 years now, and I'm kind of living in a changing field, not just a problem worsening, but a field that's responding differently. And for the longest time, so Rabbi's question was about what's happening in Florida and how to compare to things around the world and nationally and then also around the world, because what I was just giving to you was national statistics. We can break it down and look at census region each year, but we can't get much more granular than that. We only survey about between 1,500 and 2,000 Jewish people. That's not, when we put the dots of them on the map, there might be 100 in Florida. It's really small numbers to actually have a Florida-specific case study. But one thing that I've seen change in the last 5 or 6 years is we used to be, and we still are, and it's still important, but very focused on government response to anti-Semitism, law enforcement response to anti-Semitism, and having these kind of national responses. This is something that you really saw in Europe 5-6 years ago, especially when what was happening in Europe was actually even unfathomable here. Back in 2015 and 2016, when we were seeing these attacks against Jewish communities, I think there was this protection that wouldn't happen in our country. There was the creation of action plans for the whole of the country. So Germany would come up with an action plan. In fact, 2 years ago when we were last together, we hosted the German envoy who had helped create that federal action plan to counter anti-Semitism. We see this in many countries in Europe, and in fact, the United States had an action plan that was published from the federal government in May of 2023. Those are so important. I'm not denying that importance. It allows for a whole of government response. But what we're finding is that how anti-Semitism exists and the people that espouse it, the people who act on it, the attitudes, it's actually and you know this, it's much more local. It's much more local, it's much more in the state, and the need for a state-level coordination, or what's going to affect the Jews in our community, because what what Jews in Florida, or actually even maybe in Miami-Dade County, is very different from what Jews maybe in Tallahassee or even Philly, and definitely different than Portland, Oregon, or Seattle. And so these national plans were effective with government resources and national reporting and nationals, like the FBI, but didn't really necessarily help the local Jewish community, one, and that local community didn't even know about the plan. By the way, we asked the American Jews if they'd heard about the national strategy to counter anti-Semitism, something that AJC really poured our heart into for about a year and a half, helping the White House, push out some of these agenda items. Only 14% of American Jews had heard something about this effort, and it makes sense. So you don't really know necessarily what's happening in Washington or Berlin or Paris when you're suffering or dealing with things in your own community. So something that we're trying to do is better understand what's happening in certain regions in America, and we can only do this now because of having the 6 years worth of data. And we can only do it also where we have higher percentages of Jews living. So when we look at the tri-state area in New York, New Jersey, et cetera, or California, or Florida, we're actually able to do some mapping in ways that we've never been able to do before, which I want to point out just one example, just for the interest of time. I have this also, and I can share it as well. It's very, very basic. It's called a story map, by the way. The technology's data visualization. It uses something called ArcGIS technology to layer. Yeah, it's incredible, actually. We'll be able to layer our different data sets over the years onto these maps. You're not missing anything, I promise. This is just where we're doing the survey. I want to show you something, though. I'll start here. This is an interesting question. How much of a problem, if at all, is anti-Semitism today, like in the United States today? This is the percentage in Florida and the counties of those who said very serious responses. So basically, just simply put, darker blue means a greater percentage of Jews in that county said very serious. Lighter blue means a lesser percentage of Jews in that county said very serious. This was 2020. For the sake of time, all I want you to do is watch the colors change, because as it gets darker, it means more and more Jews in that county are saying very serious problems. So from 2020, and this is just 2023 data. Do you see that? This is Florida. This is on our data. This is AJC's data. So this is actually really exciting that we have enough stats to do this now. You can see this change. The direction that we're going in when it comes to figuring out what's working is being able to layer on top of these maps things like, well, this is a map. You know what? I'll say what I'm about to say here, because this is general population. So the general population, see how it's a lot lighter blue? This is for the same year as that darker blue. So you see that gap between the general population in Florida saying it's a serious problem versus Jews saying it's a serious problem. We'll be able to layer on top of these maps education level, income level. We'll be able to layer on, like, any open source census, anxieties, and we can start to see, based on other experiences, maybe why people are responding in certain ways. And this is, I think, the direction that the field is beginning to go. But I want to point one thing out that I think is very interesting. Over the last 5 years, do you think that anti-Semitism in the United States has increased, decreased, or stayed the same? This is in 2019. And I want you to look down here where Miami is. We can click on it, actually. We can see that 11%, or 11 people actually in Miami, this is getting really granular, said that anti-Semitism had increased a lot in 2019. When we go down here to 2023, and we click on Miami again, it's 7 people. I mean, these are not 1 people, but this is a representative sample. So we actually can make those bigger claims. We actually can extrapolate it outward, because SSRS has weighted everything accordingly. But you actually see Miami County have a little bit of a drop in those who say that it's increased a lot. And that actually could be, again, like, we only know what the data tells us, but things could be getting better for Jews in certain places in the U.S. and not in others. I do feel like there's been responses of government in Florida in ways we haven't seen in other states. I don't know if you felt that people are listening to you or wanting to help, or like there's been some kind of response, and that could actually be why American Jews say, actually, maybe it's just stayed the same this year. Because you see some improvement, you see some more security, you see some education, you see some of these things. So in a weird way, it's actually good for the colors to not just keep getting darker and darker, but for them to even get lighter, and we can do this on a county by county basis. So I just wanted to say that to the Florida question.
Can I make a comment?
Yep, please.
Last night I was on a Zoom call with a meeting for leaders of the Reform movement. And there was a rabbi who's a friend of mine in Oakland, California. And she was talking about the situation. I'm thinking here, things are getting better. Miami is such an easy place to be Jewish, especially comparatively to the rest of the country. And then she said something like, my husband is on the team of our congregation whose job it is to be the first responders to go and paint over anti-Semitic graffiti in our neighborhood. Because it's that common there. And just when I'm thinking, boy, can I walk around in Doral with my kippah on? You can't in parts of Oakland. So it really is dependent on where you live. And we're such a big country, the feelings are different in so many different places.
No, that's really important, and that actually is part of when we think about what the data and how it points a path forward, how it is going to be much more local data, much more local action plans, and as long as the whole society is part of that solution, that's where we'll probably see the most change, to your point. And I'm not saying we were doing it wrong 5 years ago. We just didn't actually know how granular a lot of these issues were, and that's something that we've discovered in the last few years also.
Last question? Okay. So this is my last question, and then we should have time to open it up for questions as well. I think many of us are asking ourselves the same question, well, what do we do now? So how does the data point to a path forward? Is there anything, and it gives us a little bit of hope, but is there anything more helpful to know about? And finally, are there solutions?
There were solutions. I wish there was an all-encompassing solution. There are little solutions, right, to certain things. Anti-Semitism will be with us, unfortunately, for forever. That's just the nature of the problem, but we can lower levels. We've seen it before. I still think we can see it. It can happen again, even though this time that we're in is this period of rising anti-Semitism. The data, I want quickly, again, I want to actually spend most of answering your question. So I'm going to share this deck. I think I have 5 things, the way that the data points the path forward, and I won't spend too much time. One of them is closing the knowledge gaps. I know some of you, yeah.
Is there a way to blow it up?
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. Thank you from current slide. Thank you. Is that? So I just skipped over this one, but taking the problem seriously. Our survey also does we do a whole qualitative part, by the way, so we ask a lot of questions and American Jews respond with their own words, which I think is really incredible to have that richness of individual people contributing to the survey. So if you see a quote or something in italicized, it comes from an American Jewish respondent to our survey. So closing the knowledge gaps, one thing that, while it has improved, we're seeing certain communities not knowing about anti-Semitism as well as others, which I think is really important. I know we have people here that are really passionate about intergroup and interreligious work and connecting with other communities. That's the future of our challenge. I really do believe that. One thing that AJC has been working on is the Translate Hate Glossary that you have out in front of you. We have it in Spanish, we're updating it in Spanish, but what does it mean to get it into other languages, adapt it for other communities, and continue that kind of effort? Because we know that when people understand anti-Semitism, they actually are better able to answer these other questions as well. So for instance, and I'll point to young people here, I didn't mention much about this, but one avenue of the future solution is going to be a real investment in young Americans. Our data is showing that young Jews are experiencing anti-Semitism in ways we haven't captured at this moment, like the higher rates. Their peers, their non-Jewish peers, 31% don't really know what anti-Semitism is. 18, 20 years old, young people today, young Americans, they don't know that it's a problem. the gap between older Americans saying that it's a problem, it's increased, like those great percentages I was showing, if I disaggregated just young people, young Americans, 18 to 29, they're actually lowering those numbers. I can't have a better way to put it. Those averages that we were seeing that were positive, they'd be higher if young people today actually understood the problem, so that it was increasing, et cetera. There's a real challenge, and other data sets have shown this too, that whereas a generation ago, many people in the field, again, very small field, would have said that young people were the solution. Young Americans were they don't have this traditional anti-Semitic tropes of the older generation. They are more open. They are less biased. They're saying all of these things about young Americans. And we've seen a flip about 5 years ago where there's more, and it has to do with social media. It has to do with some of these, we know this, but they actually are more likely now to believe in conspiracy theories. They're all more likely to get their news from social media. They're more likely to, a lot of these things that lead to anti-Semitic beliefs, unfortunately, we're seeing in the data with young people. Okay, I'm going to, some good things on the Holocaust as well, and knowledge on the Holocaust, but I'll come back to it. The reporting is really important when we think about solutions going forward. We know that 78% of American Jews who experienced anti-Semitism did not report it. We can't, I can't emphasize this enough, like we can't have solutions sometimes to these problems if we don't know what's happening, where it's happening, how it's happening. And the number one reason given, and this is on the other end of those receiving the reporting, is American Jews don't feel like anything will be done. Or they don't feel like it's serious enough. Like, oh, they made fun of this, but that wasn't what. So that's also the issue, is we don't really have a full understanding of the problem because most Jews don't report. The fourth thing is really ensuring that whole of society approach that I was mentioning earlier, that this is not just for government, this is not just for law enforcement, but this is for everybody. This is a really good news finding. That was one of your questions, which is which statement comes closer to your view, even if neither is exactly right. 90% of Americans say that anti-Semitism affects society as a whole, and that everyone is responsible for combating it. This is great. I mean, this is horrible, but it's great. Like, this is... They care. And we've tinkered with this question. We used to say, do you believe anti-Semitism is a problem for society or Jewish, and we left out that responsibility piece. So the next year we added it in. Who's responsible, though, for this problem? And most Americans say it's up to everybody. And the last one is on rebuilding relationships and trust to ensure greater cooperation. And this is where I'll end, and again, I'm going to share all the slides so everyone can have access to them as well. These are some good quotes, actually, about Jews who said, we don't trust each other anymore. You look at something, or you don't trust what you see, or you do trust what you see, and then you think differently of your neighbor. We need to care for each other again, and here's some of the quotes that are coming out. One good news finding, though, is that 9 in 10 Americans, both Jews and U.S. adults, say that it's important for Jewish communities to increase cooperation with each other. And the data shows actually why this is important. Those who know Jews, this is really small, I'm sorry, those who know Jewish people, which is 60% of the population, it's actually quite a lot, but 60% of Americans say they know someone personally who's Jewish. If you don't know Jews, if you look at the white line, the right is those who know Jewish people, who say they know someone who's Jewish. They're more likely to know what anti-Semitism is, to know that it's a problem, to say that it's increased, to even have seen it, because they recognize it. When they see it, they actually know what it is. They're more likely to understand, something like Jews control the media as an anti-Semitic statement, some of that conspiratorial anti-Semitism. And so this is really important when we think about relationship building, rebuilding a lot of that trust that's been broken as well. I'll just end with this quote. I think I've got one more, but I already went over that. This was a quote that came in from one of our Jewish respondents, who I think she's actually from the South Census region. She said, and it was a Jewish woman, "While the mass terrorist attacks have deeply hurt Jews around the world and instilled fear, it has also driven many Jews to fight for their identity and what they believe in. In dark times, Jews embrace who they are and make their own light." And everyone I've talked to has actually shared something similar to this, and this is, we've actually seen that also in the data. is that more Jews are also becoming affiliated. We've seen that, we've tracked that over time. Like there's been an 8 percentage point increase in Jews in 1 year who've been affiliated with a Jewish institution, or a huge increase in young Jews who say caring about Israel is important to what being Jewish means to them. In 1 year, we've seen like 11% increase in young Jews saying that caring about Israel is very important to what being Jewish means to them. So we're seeing this as a response in a positive way to something that was so horrible.
So, what an incredible opportunity to hear from real scholarship to hear what's going on. We're so grateful to the AJC, and thank you so much. I don't have much time. You have, Brian, do you have a time limit? 15 minutes. Are we good till 1:30? 10 minutes? Okay. So, I'll just talk then. So, feel free to minutes worth of questions, please, no sermons, just questions.
Thank you. I was like, I'm not kidding about the humor. Do we have a mic to go to the people who have questions?
We may not, but
We might run.
Speak real loud.
When you say report on an incident, who do you report it to?
If something happens? Yes. Okay, so the question was, if you experience an incident or you see anti-Semitism, who or what do you report it to? This is actually a great question. The number one reason given for why Americans don't report anti-Semitism, so these are not Jews. 31% of U.S. adults have seen anti-Semitism in the last year. They also don't report. And the number one reason given, they don't know how. They don't know what to do. They don't know who. It's online, it's on the street, it's like, is there a one-size-fits-all place to go and report? And there's actually really not. So something that AJC has developed, we have it on our website, it's how to report anti-Semitism. And we actually go through, if you experience an incident here, what do you do? If it's online, how to report it to each of the platforms. If it's violent, the police, the local law, we actually have to walk through kind of incident by incident, depending on severity or where it is, where you should go. Regardless, I do think it's very important to submit it to a Jewish organization that is tracking this. So whether it's ADL, whether it's actually SCN, Secure Community Network is very good also, because they actually have sometimes better data than the police. We actually map the FBI data, which is voluntary, on top of Jewish community data. The Jewish community data is often stronger, so no matter what, do still report it to a Jewish community organization so we can track it. But I can give you that website. Before we leave, I'll give you the URL so you can actually see. It's about 10 pages of how to report anti-Semitism depending on incident. It's a really, really good question. Yeah.
Holly, I have a question. So I've reported several times on Meta, on Instagram, terribly anti-Semitic accounts to get them reported, to get them removed. And every time I get a report, sorry, we don't have enough, they meet within our guidelines, yada, 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 and they don't remove the page, they don't remove anything. And it's very upsetting. There are some companies really making money off of that. They're selling things that are horribly anti-Semitic, and it's so frustrating. So I don't know, is there, like you said, reporting it to ADL, reporting it outside of Meta, but going through their channels isn't working.
Yeah. Those who couldn't hear, she was saying that people have tried to report it on social media and they don't necessarily see the change, they don't see the account removed, they don't get the feedback. But we hear this all the time. I hear you. I agree with you. 100% what you just said. I completely agree. What's really challenging is that anti-Semitism is not treated as a separate, on any of the platforms, as its own category. So what this means is the companies will, trying to find a way to put my water. The companies will categorize by hate speech. They'll categorize by harassment and bullying. They'll categorize by DOI, dangerous organizations and individuals. They'll categorize by fraud, by just very different things. And so when you look at anti-Semitism, which can be a mixture of so many different things, how do you know which thing to to label it and to put it. So it's actually quite confusing, and we do know that every company, with the exception that TikTok is working on something right now to see if they can actually capture the anti-Semitic successes, like what they've removed that's anti-Semitism, most companies actually can't say what they've removed as anti-Semitism. They can say, we've removed 90% of hate speech posts or things that have come in. We've removed, but the biggest barrier for Jews reporting now to the media, the social media, is that they don't feel like they're getting the response that they need. And so what we're doing, again, I don't know if it's going to work, but what we're doing now, and we asked this in our survey, we asked, what do you want these companies to know? And we had a whole line of questions just for Meta. So Instagram and Facebook, and American Jews took a survey just on those platforms, what happened to them. They felt, Facebook, by the way, is the #1 platform for where Jews have felt physically unsafe. And it's actually also where more Jews are using, adult Jews, and we asked them, what do they want this company to know? And I'm going to Meta headquarters one of their headquarters in London in a couple of weeks, and I'm going to share this report of how American Jews are feeling with their leadership, in part because we need some of these changes that you're saying. Again, we can always do what we can do, but we can't not do that. We have to keep showing up with the information and putting the feet to the fire. And for the most part, and this is the last thing we'll all end, is that the people that work in policy, who work in trust and safety, who are trying to do this, they're actually they are good people. There are many Jews who are in these companies also who are constantly helping us. They're up against their bottom line, they're up against their product team, they're up against the average, like those who are trying to make money for the company, and they're often fighting internally themselves on how to ensure that anti-Semitism goes down while this product is still trying to create money. That's an internal issue that might only change with legislation or only change with real public pressure against the company's leadership. Unfortunately. Yeah, and this, and then you, yeah.
I'm fascinated by the recent defunding or massive defunding for Columbia and schools, educational institutions that have been doing little or nothing towards anti-Semitism. What is the professional? I mean, on the surface it seems fabulous, but I don't know what to think about that. I'm not sure.
It's a really good question. So it's a question about some of the ways that you've seen the government, right, responding to the issues on campus. So, agency doesn't comment on everything, and we actually purposely are not publicly commenting on what's happening with Columbia. We're watching it, we're observing it. And so agency is not an official position. I will say, for me personally, and as a scholar who's kind of studied this over time, and yes, my bio was on 20th century Polish history, where I did look at anti-Semitism over time and seeing what happened to the Holocaust. There can be efforts, and this is not to demean what this defunding is, but there can be efforts that might be meant for wins in the moment that actually have adverse effects 10 years from now. And we've seen that historically when it comes to anti-Semitism interventions. And so we have to be careful that even though it might be some kind of quick win, that how people are going to be perceiving the Jewish community, perceiving the fight against anti-Semitism, that doesn't necessarily change, that doesn't somehow contribute to this idea that Jews have so much power so they can control the government, right? We have to make sure that we're not being part of pushing these narratives as well. I think government intervention in schools is very tricky, because what precedent does it set for other cases that aren't ours? And I think that's the big question we have to ask. We might like this win, or we might but what does that mean for other things in the future? And when maybe we're not the group that's being, so I think we have to ask a lot of questions right now and take our time in response instead of the quick responses that we're actually getting. But your thinking is correct. It might feel good, but is it actually good for the Jews and America, actually, in the long run? Yes, you in back.
Thank you, Colin. I was in Argentina in 1982, 1984, we were going to the Israeli Embassy and the Jewish Federation. And after that, there was a massive affiliation of Jewish synagogues. So the question is, have you experienced in your data Jewish people in America start to affiliate more to synagogues, A, and B, if non-Jewish people in your data shows that are becoming more Jewish and getting introduction to Western classes to become
your question is, what,
First is,
yeah.
in your data you found non-Jewish people that were not affiliated.
How many becoming affiliated, yes. Mhm.
A and B, if they are non-Jewish people, interesting to take Judaism class and be Jewish.
So if non-Jewish people were learning about being Jewish?
Yes, they want to become Jewish.
Oh, we don't have any data on non-Jewish people being interested in becoming Jewish. I think there is actually probably a movement of more and more non-Jews being interested in Judaism. We do ask a question, which I don't have on me, and this is a good segue to recommend. Please, ajc.org. There's 60 questions for just the Jewish population and about 40 for the general population on our website, so it's really where the details are. There's a question when we ask the general population, like how much do you know, if anything at all, about Judaism? We also ask about the Holocaust. We also ask, so we ask large questions. I don't know the answer off the top of my head, but I can at least see if more Americans know more about Judaism or Jewish identity today than they did 5 years ago. I can go back and test that. I don't know that off the top of my head, but I can get back to you.
Jewish people not affiliated become Jewish?
Jewish people, we ask a question about if their Jewish institution with which they're affiliated has increased security measures or has been targeted by anti-Semitism. What we've noticed in that question, we've had less and less people say that they're not affiliated, and so our public opinion research firm